Choyo sampo pa gyu trashi pa tuche tempe trinle yarngoda pege drolor zampe zeprache pande lame shabla solvade Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasan Utta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasan Utta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasane Kar Utta Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shas Vardhani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Dagi Chetsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Sikso So Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo So Uyon Sunge Nawa Tsedo So Tseche Ningne Sowa Debe Tse Dejen Korlo Visu Lekshune Yela Sambe Dudun Malupa Gemel Hunge Drubra Chingelo Sonyi Sodan Diktun Shape Tse Dunge Namke Yinso Lekshune Lapchen tsonyi yonsu zopadan chiranye tun chamra chingelo chancho pargi ninsen tukun tu nyu peme siudru lekshun chancho drube gegen gunshishi tungen de la drubra chingel dagi lona chola chokpadan chumin samjur ngemba shiwat chedan tumbe dudun malupa beme lungi drubra chingelo Dorna tingne tserava tamche dan techi pardu nek. Rese kyamne lama kele me tukche chingi dala sikso so. Gongyab drewe nyamda dachala chetsun lame tuche rab gongne. Kudan sungi nawa drame tu nyam sunyongwe kesan tobrasho. Kewa kundu yanda lama dan drame chiki pela longchech. Sadan lamge yente rabzone dorje changi kopan yor tobe sho pakyuke kodan dagilu pakyuke sungdan dagi nga pakyuke tukdan dagi ten yerme chiktu chingi lo makyuke kodan dagilu makyuke sungdan dagi nga Makyuke tudan da geyi ten yerme çıktı çingelo Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Kyamuni Swaha Sashipeke Choshemeto Tamare Rabalingashe Nide Gempadi Sange Shinto Mikte Ulvarki Drokun Namanda Shingla Chö sakam niryatayami. Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso che dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupar sho sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso che dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupara sho sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye drupara sho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Lai ke da ludan vijin ke drupundana mi ke namdam drowa kunge dhanam chi tsampa thamche ke tu dagi che ten thamche ke tu dagi che ten. Buonasera.
Good evening.
Una delle chiavi
One of the most important keys
nel nostro percorso,
along
nella nostra
our
vita in
path and
generale,
in our lives in general,
poi nel nostro percorso spirituale in
and
particolare,
in particular along our spiritual path,
è la nostra
is
capacità di
our ability
consapevolezza di
to
se
be aware of ourselves,
la nostra capacità
our
di
ability
autoosservazione,
to observe
di riuscire a
ourselves,
osservare
to be
e
able to
vedere
observe and
le nostre
see our
azioni, le nostre
actions, our
interazioni, le nostre
interactions,
parole
our
e in
speech, our
fondo
words,
riuscire a
and
osservare e vedere la
be
nostra
able
mente.
to observe, watch our own mind.
Perché se manca
Because if
consapevolezza,
without awareness,
quello che accade
what
è che
happens is
finiamo
we end
principalmente a
up
reagire
mostly
dinanzi alle
just
varie situazioni della
reacting
vita.
to the various situations in
E ci
life.
sono situazioni
And
di
there
ogni
are
genere.
all kinds of
E dinanzi a ogni
situations.
tipo di
And in
situazione
front of
finiamo
each
per
time of
avere
situation, we
una
have
reazione.
a reaction.
E nella mancanza di
And with
consapevolezza
the
la
lack
nostra
of awareness, our
attenzione
attention
è
is
prevalentemente esterna.
mostly external.
Noi osserviamo,
We
vediamo il
observe and
mondo
we
che ci
see the
circonda,
world
vediamo gli
around
oggetti
us.
di
We see these
attrazione,
objects
vediamo
of
gli oggetti di
attractions, objects
avversione,
of
quello che ci
aversion,
piace, quello che
the
non
things
ci
we
piace,
like, things
eccetera,
we
eccetera.
don't like, etc.,
E viene a
etc. And
mancare
what's missing is
un'autoconsapevolezza, viene a mancare
self-awareness. What's
la
missing
visione di se
is the
stessi in
vision
tutto
of oneself in the middle of all this. So when there's awareness instead, not only is there the reality that surrounds us, the various situations, but at the same time, there's the way that we ourselves interact with this reality. There are our own choices. There are our emotions, our words, our speech, our thoughts. And according to how we interact, our life completely changes. A fundamental point in life is not what happens, but how we interact, how we respond to what happens to us. You see people who've had marvelous opportunities and were not able to take advantage of them, or many other people who had very, very difficult situations but were able to grow, to learn, and find something marvelous in the middle of that very difficult situation. And what makes the difference really are not the conditions that we have, but the way we live what we experience. What we live. Unfortunately, or thank goodness, depending on the context, we're made up of habits. And the only way to change a habit is by stopping to feed that habit and creating an opposite habit. And to do that, one of the first important things for us is to observe ourselves. Imagine if we're driving a car, and in driving the car, we take the wrong road. I think it's happened to everyone, to take the same road day after day, you know, from home to work, or from your kid's school, home, the road you take every day, and then one day you need to take a different road, you need to go somewhere else, and you forget. And then, without realizing it, you've taken the road that you always take. There's even sad stories connected to things like this, and which we don't need to remember now. But if I'm driving, I'm going in a direction, but I don't have awareness, I don't see what I'm doing. I'm in a kind of automatic and I, you know, I'm on like automatic pilot, and I don't have mindfulness. In Tibetan, we say Dempa and Shershing. If we don't have this presence, this awareness, this mindfulness of what we're doing, then we end up just, we go on automatic pilot. We repeat, you know, we repeat these inner mechanisms, these dynamics. How can I say dynamics that we've used since childhood, and we react automatically, spontaneously, the way we speak, the way we react physically. There are certain ways of acting that after just a short time they become automatic. Like complaining is a good example. It's incredible. I mean, it's worse than any kind of virus. The way it goes from one to another, it's very contagious. And when we start complaining, at the beginning it's not normal, but after a while, and then after just a short time, it becomes almost natural, spontaneous. It's just an automatic habit. And this happens to us when we do things, when we speak, when we interact, etc., without awareness, without the awareness of what we're doing. The example like before, I'm driving, I take a road, I don't even know which road I am taking. I do what I'm used to, and then when I realize it, I'm in the wrong place. I was supposed to go somewhere else. this automatic behavior, sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes it can be devastating as a result. And when we do something without this mindful recollection, I mean, we're still responsible for everything we do and say. We can't say, oh, but I wasn't, because of this, that, I wasn't in control of myself. No, we were always responsible for ourselves. Our actions bring results, and we're responsible for those results. It's like in law. The law doesn't admit ignorance. If I break a law, I do something illegal, even though I didn't know that it was illegal, I'm still responsible for having broken the law. In the same way, any action we do, whether we're aware of it or not, aware of what we're doing or not, there are results for which we're responsible. So one of the most important things is if I'm driving, I need to recognize where I'm going, to see if I'm, how fast I'm going, what lane I'm in. I need to see what's around me. I need to be aware of what's happening around me. And at the same time, in our lives, it's fundamental to have this awareness, the awareness of how we interact with others, the way I speak, and even to get to the awareness of my own thoughts. Because when I have awareness of what's happening, I can redirect them. I can redirect myself, and this is where the difference lies. The habits are there, and to change them, one needs to, little by little, change. Okay, I want to criticize, but I'm not going to criticize. I want to say something bad, but I'm not going to say it. I want to eat that chocolate, but I'm not going to eat it. Nothing against chocolate, but just to give an example. I don't feel like being nice, but I'm going to be nice. Not in a false way, but I have to put effort into it. And it's here that gradually we change habits and we create other ones. Today I remember that during the puja, there are the different offerings that are made, and one, the different parts of the robes, and one is the skirt, and in the text it says that the skirt is made up of 3 parts. There are 3 parts, two smaller below and one larger above. That represents training. They're the 3 higher trainings, as they're called, the 3 higher trainings. The importance of training in morality, concentration, and wisdom. And all the teachings of Buddha can be summarized in these 3 higher trainings called Laba in Tibetan. Sutren Ki Laba, Sherab Ki Laba. There's 3 higher trainings. So this spiritual path towards enlightenment is not something immediate. It's a path of transformation, of training. And a very important step, I repeat once again, is awareness, being able to see what we're doing. And we start by generating awareness of our body, to then have awareness of our speech, to get to having awareness of our own mind, our own thoughts, and our own emotions. When we try to have awareness, for example, of our own speech, we try to observe the way we speak. We have an idea of how we want to speak and how we don't want to speak. I don't want to use words that go towards criticism. I like to be constructive in my criticism. I like my words to be based on love and not hate, that they don't create division between people. I want my speech to be to be coherent with my view of reality. I don't want to lie, etc. We have an idea of how we want our speech to be. Once I have clarity about that, it's as if we're making the white lines of the road, and then during the day I observe, am I actually staying within those lines or not? But instead, if I see that I'm using my speech in a way that I don't want, I take a breath, maybe I bite my tongue, I swallow, I change the subject. If it's already come out, okay, awareness, I don't want to speak like this without a sense of guilt. This is just the process of redirecting ourselves. But to direct our speech, I need to know how I want my speech to be. I need to be aware also how my speech is to then be able to give it the right direction, to be able to direct our mind, to have this awareness of our own mind. One, we need to have an idea. We have an idea of how we want our mind to be, and then we need to observe our mind. And these two cases, it's really important to know better our mind, understand better the mechanisms of our thoughts, of our emotions, how they work. And through this knowledge, this increases our ability to be aware so that we can observe ourselves, our thoughts, our emotions, because one of our objectives is to get to a degree of awareness where we're able to recognize the subtleties of our motivation, to be able to see when our selfishness is coming out, they're hidden, and we're able to jump on him and say, no, here you're not welcome. We're able to see before that anger comes out. And we can see that aversion, the very subtle aversion arises, and we're able to stop it and not let it grow. It's to get to that. Something that's important is understanding better the mechanisms of our own mind, how the mind works. And this is one of the objectives of studying the mind. For this, now we'll pick up again. In Buddhist philosophy, there are many aspects of the mind, and the main subject it's called Lorig. Lo means mind. Rik, it can be translated as knowledge. It's the knowledge of the mind, knowing the mind. There are two main subjects that are studied, not really together, usually one and then right after the other, and the order is not necessarily always the same. Lorig, and the other subject is called Tarik. Tarik. Tak means sign. It's the knowledge of signs, where we study debate and logic. So Tarik is the study of debate and logic, and the Lorig is where we study the mind, where we classify the different types of thoughts, etc. Let's see quickly, before looking at the mental factors more deeply, let's look at page 50. Because when we study the mind, there are two ways to observe the mind. One, the different types, the different types of thoughts, minds, because the mind, there's no one generalized mind. The mind is made up of many small consciousnesses or thoughts. We can call it in many, many different ways. Each thought is made up of different aspect characteristics that are called mental factors, and that's what we'll dedicate most of our teachings to. But let's just quickly, just to have a general idea of the various classification of primary minds. The primary mind is a mind that observes one object, that is based on one sense power, and it observes one specific object. When I change the sense power or I change the object, then I change the mind, I change the thought. If I'm looking at an apple and at a certain point I start looking at the cup, these are two different thoughts because they have two different objects of perception that are different. When we talk about primary mind, there are different ways to classify it. So let's look, this is another subject, and we could spend a lot of time studying it, but let's, without getting into details, let's look at it quickly. I wanted to look at it a little superficially to have a general idea, and then we'll look at the mental factors. You know, all of these minds are composed of mental factors, which we'll look at. So the page 50, the classification of the mind in terms of valid and non-valid cognition. It's Lorig Dun. These are the 7 types of cognition. So valid or non-valid cognition. A valid cognition is a perception that matches the object that it perceives. Non-valid instead is a mind that perceives an object in a way that the object itself is not able to sustain. So there are valid and non-valid cognitions, minds. So it's divided into 2. Valid cognition, Tsema in Tibetan. We have 4 different types. We've got Nosum Tsema, Wampo Nonsum Tsema, Yiki Nonsum Tsema, and Rangrig Nosum Tsema, and Neljor Nosum Tsema. And then the last one, Rang Dunje Su Papa. No, there are 2, the Non Su Tsema and the Je Sum Tsema. So there's the direct cognition and the inferential valid cognition. So it doesn't. The valid cognition is a perception that is direct. It doesn't come through let's give you an example. When we see something, we have a direct contact with that object. When we hear something, we have a direct contact with that object. But if at a certain point, classic example that's given is if I see smoke that comes from behind, now we have this house, we have the house of our center. The original example was behind the mountain. So if we see smoke coming behind the mountain, we see the smoke directly, but we can understand that behind the mountain there's fire because there's smoke coming out, right? We could say we know that where there's smoke, there's also fire. So if I see smoke that comes from behind the mountain, I say, oh, there's a fire behind the mountain. Why? Because I see smoke. I don't have a direct perception of the fire, but I know I'm able to perceive the fire through a logical reasoning. And this is called an inferential cognition. When we don't have a direct perception of the object, but we use logic. There are inferential valid cognitions and there are inferential invalid cognitions. When the logic is valid, it's an inferential valid cognition, vice versa. When we look and we use this inferential cognition enormously, every time we come up to a conclusion, you're like this because you did that. This is like this because that's like that. We use logic that is not always right. not always correct, but you can have inferential valid cognition through a valid logic. Instead, when the object comes to us through our senses and not through a mental image, but direct contact, then it's called a direct valid cognition. So there are direct valid cognitions that are for sensory, what I see, what I touch, what I taste, what I smell. What I touch, the five senses. And then we have valid mental direct cognition. It's a little more difficult to explain. It's possible to perceive certain things mentally in a non-conceptual way. These are experiences that we can have, mental experiences where we perceive, we have a perception that is totally mental, but not conceptual. It's an inner experience more than a process or one is imagining something. For example, when one meditates on impermanence, for example, there comes a moment where at the beginning one perceives impermanence through a logical path, and then at a certain point one is able to perceive impermanence in a non-logical way. One goes beyond, and it's called a direct experience. And when there's a direct experience, it goes beyond words. One's not able to put it into words. Then we have the valid self-knowing direct cognition. This self-knowing, this is a small part of the mind that perceives the mind itself. And here we could spend hours and hours debating on this. And then, number 4, we have the valid yogic direct cognition. Nejor no sumtsema. It's the valid direct cognition of the non-inherent existence of self. It's the realization of emptiness. For some, it means a lot. For others, it means nothing. We're not going to go into the details right now. I need to hold back a little bit. I just want to give you a general idea. Just in a few words, the valid cognition is in 2 types. So either a direct experience or through logic, that we're able to perceive the object. Then, number 2, we have non-valid cognition, when we see or we attribute a meaning to an object that doesn't correspond to the object itself. And we have Lokshe, Tetsum, Cheshe, Yichu, and Namla Manye. So the 5 of them. Lokshe is conceptual wrong awareness, which Lokshe is divided into conceptual wrong awareness and non-conceptual wrong awareness, or we could call it conceptual wrong perception. So, for example, if I'm in an airplane and I see small little houses, and from above, or even just during the daytime here around the lake, we could say, oh, look at those tiny little houses. The houses, are those houses small like that? Or is it a wrong awareness based on our on distance? When I was a child, for example, when I would go, I remember on the beach at night, I'd like to go in the back of the car and see the moon, and it felt like the moon was following me. I would be on my back looking out the back of the car, but the moon wasn't following me. Or if I take lit incense and I spin it around, we have this perception as if there was a circle of fire, but there is no circle. It's a wrong awareness, a wrong perception. And we could even open up some debates. When I see the images in a film that are moving, is that a valid cognition or a non-valid cognition? Are those just frames or is there movement? I mean, those are many, many still images. So one could ask, does movement exist or not? Here we could debate. I mean, what's beautiful about these studies is being able to open up to debate. And when I studied these things, my master, he would ask us questions without giving the answer, and then we needed to debate and think about it again. And often we weren't able to find all answers, and it's wonderful also to not have all the answers, so that we're left with this desire to learn more. There was one friend who studied a classmate, and he didn't like debate much. And he would come to debate sessions, and he would say, "Oh, I don't have any doubts. I'm good." And that was his way of saying that he didn't want to debate. But having doubts is wonderful. So we shouldn't take everything for granted. We should take things as an indication and use it as a door to learn and research more. So non-valid cognitions is very interesting, the whole topic of non-valid cognition. So non-conceptual ones are quite clear. So like those sensorial ones, like the circle and the small houses. And then there are conceptual wrong awarenesses. The conceptual ones are when we attribute value to something that is not like that, like seeing a phenomenon as being an impermanent phenomenon as being permanent, then that would be a conceptual wrong awareness. The second type of non-valid cognition is called tetsum in doubt, translated as doubt, or uncertainty would be better. And there are three types. There are doubts that tend towards the truth, there are doubts that tend away from the truth, and then there are balanced doubts. So you can make any example, give any example. If I see an object that's impermanent, if I say, is it impermanent or not impermanent? I don't know. I think it's impermanent. I mean, that's a doubt that tends towards the correct answer, but it's not actually the correct way of seeing it. Instead, if I say, oh, I think it's permanent, then that would be a doubt tending away from the truth. And then the balanced doubt would be impermanent, permanent, I have no idea, I'm neutral. And these are uncertainties, doubts, uncertainties. And then we have a mental state called Cheshe, and we're full of Cheshe. Cheshe is translated here as a recognizer. Or subsequent cognition. There's direct, non-conceptual, or conceptual. What is a Cheshe? We see an object, or we hear a sound. So the direct valid cognition is just that first moment when we come into contact with the object, the direct valid cognition. Let's try to analyze a little bit here. When we see an object, for example, this apple, are you able to see this apple? So we see this apple, what happens? Light touches the apple, the light reflects towards our eyes, or to the camera for those of you who are at home. And what happens? The light has a certain vibration frequency, comes to our eyes. Our visual consciousness perceives that signal. We have our own inner research to see if there's something that looks like that object, and in that discernment, we attribute a name and we say that's an apple. In other words, it's similar to like artificial intelligence, where you take a photo of an object and the computer looks into its data bank to see what it is. And we have this inner process. But once I see the object and I attribute the name and I say this is apple, right away afterwards, I have a continuity of that perception. And in that afterwards, are we still looking to understand what that is? Or are we recognizing what we already know? Are we looking for other names to the objects? No, we're recognizing, again, we're recognizing that object. So we should understand what we mean by knowing and then re-knowing, cognize and recognizes. So when we know something, it's something new. And then with this recognizing, we're giving continuity of what we've already established. But if I see the apple and I attribute a value, a name, I have a mental image, and I attribute that to the apple, that's the apple. I've seen it. But after that, I stay in that state of that perception. But in the meantime, is that apple transforming or not? It's changing. But are we aware of that change, those changes? No, because we stay in that with that first perception, because the perception that we have now is not one that updates with those changes. It gives continuity to that first contact. Is this clear? And this continuity is called Yeshe in Tibetan, this recognizing the previous perceptions. And we have this with so many things. We have so many of these. All sensory objects are impermanent. All sensory objects are impermanent. Even sound is. To say, when we hear the sound of the bell, that first instant, I heard the sound, but that sound transformed. The strength of the sound transforms. There's so many aspects that change, but we're not necessarily able to perceive those changes. So when we have that first perception, and then afterwards we're simply giving continuity to that continuity that can last as long as it needs to is called a recognizer, Yeshe in Tibetan. When it's conceptual, it's conceptual recognizer. Instead, if it's a sensory perception, then it's a recognizer that is sensorial. Then we also have Yichu, which is also very interesting. The definition of Yichu. And if we went into details to each one, we would see the classification, the definition, all the examples, the doubts that come out. But we're not going to go into all the details. But just to explain what is correct presupposition or assumption, Yichu. It's an assumption, not necessarily. Here I had written correct, but I don't think it's right to have written correct. It's just a presupposition or assumption. We can cancel that correct. So the definition is the mind that has the total certainty of something without having had a direct experience of that object, or without having a logical reason about that object. Someone told me something. I'm sure that it's like that, but did I see it? No. Did I have a direct experience about it? No. Do I have a logical reasoning about it? No. Let me understand that? No. For example, I don't follow any conspiracy theories, but let's say, so did man go land on the moon or not? Question. Apparently, yes. So normally we believe that man landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. Question. Did we have a direct perception of his moon landing? Did any of you see that? No, but we saw TV. We saw it on TV. Well, I didn't see it. I wasn't even born. My mother said that she was there with her father, her grandfather, in a place in Brazil. They had a very tiny TV, and they were really trying to get these images. But what they saw was, those who saw it on TV, they saw a representation. So what we can talk about is, I'm sure that they represented man landing on the moon. That is, I have a do I have a logical process to understand that man landed on the moon? Valid? No. No, what we have is an assumption. We trust what we were told. And so we're sure that man landed on the moon. But and I don't really care if there was really a moon landing or not. You know, this is the first time I've ever dedicated, I've never thought 5 minutes about this, but just to give you an example. But the point is, most of us believe that there was a moon landing by man, but what our perception was, what cognition is that? Is it direct cognition? Inferential? Is there logic behind it? It's an assumption. I didn't see the person go and come back. What I saw, I saw someone who told me about it. Let's forget the moon. Let's say somebody tells us something, and I believe it. But why do I believe it? Because I trust that person who told me that. So when someone tells us something, or we see some kind of representation of something, and we believe that, and we get to that conclusion without having had our own direct experience of that specific object, and without having a logical reason that makes us understand clearly that specific option, then we call that an assumption, which can be correct or incorrect. They go into the category of non-valid because it's always imagination. It's always imagining something based on something that was seen or said. It's much different from a direct cognition. A valid direct cognition, direct valid cognition. Someone tells me something, what Buddha, someone tells me of what Buddha said. That's also an assumption. Here, faith is very important. I have faith in that, in this or that. It's like we can see here, we have the different types. We have the assumption in contradiction to a reason without a reason. It's assumption with a non-determining reason, or assumption with a non-established reason, or with an unknown reason. For some reason, we believe into something either without a reason, or because someone gave us a reason we don't understand. Often I see, this is like this because we heard that on the news. Or one I didn't really, often the reason is not even well understood, but somehow we get to that same conclusion. So it's delicate. The assumptions are, there are those that are correct and there are those that are incorrect. But generally speaking, it's in our lives, it's very important to observe for ourselves what are our, direct valid cognitions, what do I perceive, what is valid and what is non-valid. Very often we get to conclusions where there's not even reason for it. There's simply someone said, or I heard, I saw this, and we jump to conclusions often without even giving a reason. So they're much more present in our lives than we think. And it's something that we need to be careful of. We need to observe them. Because an assumption is an assumption, and it could be right or it could be wrong. So an important question is, where does this assumption take me? And be aware that an assumption is it's an assumption. This is important, another important aspect. Faith. What happens here? That's another part. For example, there are 3 types of phenomena called how can I translate this? They're open, hidden, and very hidden phenomena. The open phenomenon are the ones that can be perceived through our senses directly. They're the things that can be perceived by our senses. Hidden phenomenon cannot be seen or experienced through our senses, but can be seen through reason, and the very hidden phenomenon cannot be experienced through our senses and not even through reason. So that's where faith comes in. Faith is based on, and here we're opening up a door, and this is when we talk about the different types of mind, there's one that has to do with faith. But the basis of faith is a direct experience with the speaker, or the other. Because once I trust, because I have a direct experience with the person in front of me, or your example, Luisa, was Lama Ganchen, I've had my experience. And so when many things I've seen that it's real. And so even if he tells me something I don't understand, I trust him. In my case, often Rinpoche said things that I said, really? Is that really true, what he's saying? And then after 10 years, after 20 years, he was right. So after the first, the second, third time where he's right, okay, one says, I trust him. And this is how faith works. I trust the one in front of me because of my direct experience. I recognize that I can only get to a certain level. And even in science, the scientist tells us something, some kind of scientific discovery. I don't have the ability to perceive directly what was said, and my knowledge doesn't allow me to understand that through my logic, but as an act of faith, I believe what he says. Faith exists. There are 2 types of faith. There's the faith that is based solely on I follow blindly what I've been told, and in certain cases that could be when someone is not ready to understand everything, and one needs to have that kind of faith, but you can't base your understanding solely on that. And then there's another kind of faith that is based on one's own experience. I have faith because I've had direct experience, and that's another type of faith. If we didn't have faith in anything and no one, then many of the things that we believe in, we really wouldn't believe in at all. So much of what we think we believe is based on acts of faith and assumptions. So many things that we learn at school, the things that have to do, like for example, the science examples, they tell me something. They say that this is that the speed of light is constant. Have I have that perception directly? Do I have the ability to follow the logical reason why the speed of light is constant? Personally, I don't. But all the scientists say so. Einstein is famous. I'm going to trust that that's true. This is the kind of, this is an assumption. The beautiful thing about this subject is that it opens many, many doors. But let's first try to have a general idea, and then we can go into more details. But it's important to see that we have many, many assumptions, and it's not necessarily something negative. For example, when we talk about realizing impermanence or realizing the correct view of reality, the first step is having a correct presupposition and a correct assumption related to emptiness. Then the next step is having a correct inferential inferential valid cognition, and then the next step is having a direct valid cognition. So it's not necessarily something wrong, but it's important to recognize when something is or is not an assumption. Let's go on. And then we have the next, which is what we have the most compared to all of them, is that non-ascertaining perceiver or cognition. And we can have non-ascertaining sense direct perceiver, mental direct perceiver, or a non-ascertaining self-knowing direct perceiver or self-cognizer. They're all perceptions that we have that we're not aware of. For example, when we're driving, there's so many objects that go past us, but we're not really paying attention to them. So many things that happen, so many objects that we come in contact with our senses, but we're not aware of them. So once I read, I saw it actually in a documentary that talked about the aspects of the mind. At a certain point, they said in every second, the mind receives about 2 billion pieces of information. And of these 2 billion pieces of information, the mind normally is aware of about 2,000. So all of this information that we receive, where is all of that? It's in the Namla Ma Nyeba. These are non-ascertaining. This translation is not great, but Nyeba means to grasp. Nam means to appear. It appears, but it is not taken, it is not grasped, but it doesn't mean that that information doesn't get to us. I mean, we perceive it, but we're not aware of it. We don't ascertain, we don't grasp. There are millions of examples. What about like subliminal messages, for example? That's a great example. These are images that come so quickly that the eye is not able to see them well. We're not able to read, to have memory of that. But that message stays there. We could give many, many examples. Times, for example, maybe we're a little bit lost in something, and then someone talks to us, and we can't hear them. We've received that information. It's not that we didn't receive that information, but we didn't grasp it. So that information is part of this type of perception, namla manyeba, where it appears, but it's not grasped. It's not perceived. And with this is one way of classifying. Then I give the definition of each one. I got into more details. And in this moment, I don't think it's necessary because there would be certain levels of details that would, if we open up this subject, we'd be here tomorrow and then when we talk about the mental factors, we'd have to come back another time. And then there's another way to classify the mind, which is page 56. It's the classification of the mind in terms of dominant condition. And here, practically, there are thoughts that are generated directly or connected to our five senses, and those that are connected to the sense of our mind and not our sense powers. So there's the eye awareness, the ear awareness, nose, tongue, body awareness, and then there's the mental awareness. So when we talk about primary mind, we saw that primary mind, first of all, there are some thoughts, perceptions that are valid, and then there are perceptions are non-valid. What determines whether it's valid or not? What does, because we can see the same object and have a different perception, right? So what determines if that perception is valid, not valid, if they're both valid, if they're both invalid? If I take, it's a little heavy, this object. Let's take this object here, this bell. I see it as being small, and someone could see it as being big. I see it as a bell. Someone could see it as a cup. I call it mine. You might call it yours. What determines if our perception is right or wrong is if the whole of the parts of the object, if the object in its whole is able to sustain the characteristics and the functions that we have attributed to it. So when I see a circle of light in the air, and I say, there's a circle of light in the air. When it's just a point of light that's turning, and I say, look at that circle of light in the sky. Can that object sustain the characteristics that I've attributed to it? Is there a light that has made a perfect circle, like a point of light that is completely that the points touch to make a circle? No. If I say look at that point of light that turns around and makes it look like it's a circle, then that's valid. If I look at the houses by the lake and I say, look at those houses, normal houses, but given how far away we are, they look small, then it's a valid. But if I say, look at those tiny houses, I could fit them in my hand, that would be an erroneous perception. Let me give you an example that happened to me this summer. I went walking in the mountains. I was on and at Monte Rosa, and I got to a frozen lake, and I always make a loop. I don't like walking in one direction and coming back the same. So I looked from above, I saw the lake, and I said, I think I can jump across it. And so I went down. It seemed closer, but it really wasn't that close. What seemed like 1.5 meters, and when I got down to the lake, it was like 6 meters. So from above, it appeared to me as if it were a very short distance that I would have been able to jump over. And instead, when I got there, it was, I'm not able to jump 6 meters. And I thought, oh, it's not very deep. Maybe I can just walk, I walked another 500 meters, and it was just enormous. It was very, very deep. It didn't seem deep. And then I tried to get into the water. I went behind my knees, and I jumped out. I got out right away because it was freezing, and it was just painfully freezing. These are wrong awarenesses because I gave a value that the object was not able to sustain. So when we give value to something, what determines if our perception is valid or invalid is if the whole of the parts of that object are able to sustain, to uphold the characteristics and functions of that object. And so this is what determines a cognition being valid or invalid. So it could be sensorial, it could be sensory or mental. It can be valid or non-valid. And there are so the valid cognitions and the invalid cognitions, they can be sensory, they can be mental, they can be assumptions, they can be the subsequent conditions of perceptions that came before. This just to help you have a little understand the different types of minds that can come. When I studied this, I was quite young. So I started to observe in my daily life what type of thought I was having. So here, this is a direct cognition. Oh, this is an inferential. This is an inferential cognition. Is it valid or is it non-valid? What are the doubts? What kind of doubts do I have? Recognize this mind that is the continuity of a perception that had already come about, and and then also all the information that comes to us that we're not able to actually grasp. So play this game, observe your mind. It's not that difficult. This helps us to have more awareness of our thoughts. If I see, okay, I got to this conclusion about this object, and I realize, okay, this is an assumption. When I recognize that perception is an assumption, naturally, then I trust up to a certain point. It's different than it coming from a valid logic or from a valid like a direct experience. Tarig, for example, this study of debate, there I look, for example, if I'm talking about inferential cognition, and then I analyze my reasoning. So, and I I studied it. I found it really boring, all the different types of logic. I liked, I preferred the Lorig, the study of the mind. So here a whole world comes out.
Però cominciamo, per adesso rimaniamo su questi punti. Ok? E ripeto una volta ancora, osservare quali sono
So
le
just
nostre
to
cognizioni
repeat
differenziali.
again, what are our
Arriviamo alle
inferential
conclusioni,
cognitions? How is it that we
passiamo
get
lo
to
stesso
conclusions
un
about
percorso
things?
logico.
Is it a
Per
logical,
esempio,
are we following
quando la
logical
maggioranza delle
reasoning?
persone
For
intorno a noi,
example, when
nel
most
contesto in cui
people
viviamo,
in the context in which
credono,
we live
dicono una cosa,
believe
ci
something or
fidiamo
say
o no?
something, do we trust it or not?
Di solito sì.
Normally, yes.
Ok? Questo per esempio, apro e chiudo una parentesi,
Just I open and
è
close
uno dei problemi che
parentheses.
esiste oggi
And
con le media sociali.
it's one of the biggest
Perché
problems
che
we have
cosa
with social
succede?
media.
Quando io interagisco
When I
con 20
interact
persone,
with
perché
20
in
people,
realtà
because
ognuno
in
di noi
reality we each
lascia stare le
let's
interazioni
you know
digitali.
let's
Pensiamo
leave
all'interazione
digital
faccia a
interaction
faccia.
and just
Con
face
quante
to
persone
face. How
effettivamente
many
interagiamo
people do
quotidianamente?
we actually interact with
Mettiamo insieme.
daily?
500?
500,
200?
200.
Interagire le persone che io conosco il nome, con
You
cui
know, the
parlo
people
tutti i
that
giorni,
that we talk to
con
every
cui
day, whose name we
condividiamo.
know, that we have a
Alla
daily
fine son pochi.
that we have daily
Ok?
interaction with. There are very
Che
few
cosa
in the
succede
end.
quando
And
tutte
so
le
what happens
persone
when
o la gran
all of those
maggioranza
people
delle
or
persone con
most
cui
of
io
those people,
interagisco
the people that I
credono
interact
in
with
qualcosa
daily
o dicono un
believe
qualcosa?
in something or
Tutti
say
dicono
something,
quello.
we say
Tutti credono in quello.
everyone believes
Ma
this.
tutti chi? Tutti quelli
Everyone
con cui io
says this. But
interagisco.
who's everyone? All the ones that I
Cosa succede
interact
quando
with.
noi
So what
interagiamo sempre
happens
con
when we
persone che fanno
interact
parte
with
dello
people
stesso
who are
cerchio, dello
part
stesso
of that
piccolo mondo
same
chiuso?
small
Le
closed
idee
world of
rimangono
ours?
sempre
The ideas
le stesse.
stay the same.
Per questo l'importanza di
So
interagire con persone
that's why it's
diverse,
important to interact
è
with
trovarci
different
davanti a
people
idee
and
diverse
find
e non
ourselves in
sempre
front of
le
different
stesse.
ideas and not
E
just
nel
the
mondo
same.
delle media
And in
sociali
social
questo viene
media, in the
riprodotto
world of social media, this is
perché noi
reproduced because
vediamo
we
nei
see
media
the
sociali
social media.
quello
What we see in social
l'algoritmo ci
media,
porta
the
l'informazione
algorithm
cose simili
brings
a quelle
us
che a noi ci piacciono.
information that we
Le cose che
like.
noi vediamo
So
di solito,
the
quelle a
things
cui
that we
noi abbiamo
normally
dato più
see,
attenzione,
that we gave
perché
more
l'obiettivo
attention
dell'algoritmo
to,
è
because
tenerci
the
all'interno di quel
the
mondo il più
objective
tempo
of the
possibile.
algorithm is to keep us
Quindi
in
ci
that
porta le
world.
cose che a noi
So
ci
it
piacciono,
brings us the things
creando
that
una
we
visione
already
del
like,
mondo
giving us a world
totalmente
view that is
parziale,
totally
totalmente
partial,
manipolabile.
manipulated, if
Ok?
you want.
Però questo fa parte
But
di una
this
nostra
is
dinamica. Quindi
part of our
dobbiamo stare
dynamic. We need
attenti
to be
quando
careful
noi arriviamo a
when
certe
we
conclusioni,
get
quando
to
noi siamo
certain
davanti a qualcosa. Da
conclusions,
dove
when we're
viene
in
questa
front of
conclusione?
something. Where
Per
did this
esempio,
conclusion
abbiamo delle
come from?
presupposizioni
We have
che non vengono da
assumptions, for
qualcosa che
example, that
qualcuno ha
don't
detto,
come
ma
from what
vengono da un
someone
nostro
said,
processo
but from our own
interno
inner
di
process of
giustificazione, per giustificare delle
justification,
nostre emozioni.
or a way of justifying our own emotions.
Ossia, io sento avversione,
I feel aversion, for
giustificare la
example.
mia avversione.
I need
Quindi vado a
to
cercare una narrativa
justify this aversion. I
che
need
sia
to find a
coerente con la mia
storyline that's
avversione.
coherent with
Sento
my
paura, devo
with
trovare una narrativa che sia coerente
my aversion. I
con
feel
la
I
mia
am
paura.
afraid. I need to find a
E quindi
storyline
alla
that's going
fine
to
finisco a
justify
dire
this
questo è
fear.
così,
So I say
quello è
this is
cos'ha,
like
eccetera,
this is like that,
eccetera.
etc.,
Ma in realtà
etc. But
sulla
in
base di che
reality, it's
cosa
based
questo è
on
così e quello
what?
è cos'ha?
This is like
Una
this is like that. It's
presupposizione
based on an
che si
assumption
basa su che
that is
cosa?
based on what?
Sulla ricerca di una
Based on
coerenza
this
con i miei
looking
sentimenti.
for a storyline that corresponds,
Siamo?
that matches, that upholds my feelings.
Prego. Sì. L'intuizione,
Intuition.
dobbiamo vedere dove metterla
We need to
perché
see
l'intuizione è una
where
parola
to.
che non saprei come tradurla in tibetano.
I don't know how to
Quindi non
translate
so bene
intuition
dove
in
inserirla
Tibetan,
qua.
so I don't know
Però
where to put it. But
l'intuizione,
intuition,
innanzitutto,
first of
se noi
all,
facessimo, no,
if
vediamo
we
dove va messa.
were
È
to
una
look at it,
percezione sensoriale o una percezione
is it
mentale l'intuizione?
mental or sensory? perception.
l'oggetto di
The
percezione
object of
dell'intuizione
perception of
è la
intuition,
forma, il
is it
suono,
form,
il gusto,
sound,
il tatto,
taste,
l'olfatto,
touch,
o è un
smell,
oggetto mentale?
or is it a mental
È
object?
mentale.
It's mental.
Perciò prima di tutto
So first of all,
la intuizione
the
è un
intuition,
oggetto mentale,
it's a
una
mental,
cognizione mentale.
it's a
Può essere
mental
valida o
cognition.
non
It can be
valida.
valid or it can be non-valid.
Perciò per me la nostra intuizione è un processo,
For me,
chiamiamolo
our
così,
intuition
logico,
is,
per me la
let's
parola
call
più
it
giusta è non pensare,
logical, but it's not the right
dove
word
noi
to use.
basandoci sulle nostre
But we're
esperienze precedenti
basing
e
ourselves on
basandoci
our previous
sulle
experiences and the information that we have generated. We put the
in un
parts
modo
together in a way
non tanto
that is
consapevole, in un modo molto più sottile. In
on a
realtà
very subtle level,
il
not
nostro
with
inconscio tanto lavora.
our
E certe
subconscious,
volte
let's say, is
riusciamo ad
working
avere
hard,
contatto con questa
and we're
visione.
able to come into contact, let's say,
Qui esiste un
with this
lavoro
subtle level.
dell'indifferente che è di imparare ad ascoltare
And this
le
is
nostre
important to
intuizioni
learn how
e
to
portarle a
listen
galla.
to our
Di
intuition
solito sono
and
molto
bring
basse come
them
volume
and bring
e poi
them
dopo dobbiamo riportarla a un livello più concettuale per dargli una direzione.
and bring them
Però
to the
entrerebbe dentro una
to the
cognizione
surface.
mentale.
But it's
Poi
mental,
possono essere giuste come
and
ingiuste.
like we said, it's a mental
Quindi la mia
cognition that is
esperienza è che di
that
solito
is
io
could be
non posso
right or
parlare
could be
di altri,
wrong.
parlo
My
di
own
me.
experience
La
is
intuizione
that
ogni volta che ho
intuition,
saputo
every
riconoscere
time
e
I was
seguirla
able
ha
to
funzionato.
recognize it
Le
and
volte che
follow
ho
it, it
visto e
worked.
non ho seguito
When I saw that I didn't
non ha
follow
funzionato,
my
senza che
intuition,
sarebbe
it
stato
didn't
meglio seguirla.
work in the sense that it would have been
Questa è
better
la
if I
mia
had
esperienza.
listened to it.
Poi
This is my own
c'è invece delle
experience.
volte
And then
che
there are times when
sembra
it
intuizione ma è
feels
paura,
like,
sembra
it
intuizione ma
might,
è attaccamento, sembra
it seems
intuizione
like
ma
it's
è
intuition,
avversione.
but it's aversion.
Sono
It
altri
seems like
sentimenti che sono
it's
anche
intuition, but it's
mischiati, non è
fear, and those
così
are
ovvio.
other feelings that are
Ed è per
mixed
quello che dico
in.
che
So that's
l'intuizione
why I say the
come
intuition,
cosa in generale non è del
generally
tutto una cosa
speaking,
sicura,
is
perché
is
bisogna
not
vedere
always
se è
sure.
pura o se è
You have to
mischiata con
see
altre
if it's
cose.
not mixed up
Ok?
with other feelings.
Ok, con questo
So with
diciamo
this, I
che
think
abbiamo visto un po'
we've seen a little
quello che
bit
intendiamo per le varie
what we
tipologie di
mean
menti
by the
primari. Vengono
different
chiamate le sette
types
menti primari.
of
Andiamo
primary
a
minds. It's called
ricontarle.
the 7 types of primary mind. Let's try to count them.
Abbiamo quindi
We have
la cognizione diretta valida,
valid direct
cognizione
cognition,
inferenziale valida,
valid inferential valid
consapevolezza
cognition,
erronea,
the
dubbio,
wrong awareness,
riconoscimento,
doubt,
presupposizione
recognizers,
e percezione di
assumption,
non accertamento.
and then non-ascertaining
Queste sono le sette
perceivers. These are the
tipologie di
7
menti primarie.
types of
Ok?
primary minds.
Adesso,
Now,
cosa determina
what
dove
determines,
comincia
I mean,
una
where
percezione
one
e
perception
dove finisce,
begins
dove comincia
and
un'altra?
where it
Perché la
ends and
nostra
where
mente è
a
un
new
flusso di
perception
pensieri e
begins, because our
percezioni.
mind is just a flow of thoughts and
Noi,
perceptions.
nello stesso
In the
momento,
same moment,
possiamo avere
we're
fino a un
able to
massimo
have up
di
to
sei
a maximum
stati
of
mentali, di sei
6
percezioni, di sei
mental
cognizioni,
states,
chiamiamole
6
così.
cognitions.
Ok? Che io faccio fatica con le
It's
traduzioni,
difficult for me
sinceramente.
to
Comunque sia,
the
in
terms
tibetano la
that
parola è namshe,
namshe
e
is
noi
the
abbiamo un
term
totale di sei
in
che possono esistere allo stesso tempo,
Tibetan,
che
namshe.
sarebbe
So
la cognizione visiva,
we've got the the
uditiva,
so visual awareness,
olfattiva, gustativa,
auditory
tattile
awareness,
e
olfactory awareness, gustatory
Noi
awareness, or tactile
percepire
awareness.
i sei
We
oggetti
can
sensoriali
perceive
allo stesso tempo.
or mental
Però non
awareness.
possiamo
So we
avere
can
due
perceive
percezioni o due
all
cognizioni
6
dello stesso tipo
at one
allo
time,
stesso
but we
tempo.
can't perceive 2 of the same type at the
Perciò,
same
cosa
time.
determina
So
che
what
comincia una
determines where
e
one
finisce, comincia
begins
un'altra?
and ends and a
Questo lo
new one
vediamo
begins? And
qua in
we'll
pagina
see this. You
14,
can see that on page 14,
dove andiamo a vedere quelli che vengono
where we
chiamati 5
we
aspetti
talk about the 5
concomitanti.
concomitant aspects of the mind, of the primary mind.
Ok? Il primo,
The first one,
hanno la stessa base.
they have the same base.
Questo, in realtà, questi 5 fattori
These
aspetti concomitanti
5
servono per
concomitant
determinare la mente
aspects
primaria e i
determine
fattori mentali.
determine the primary mind and the mental factors. As we said yesterday, the mental factors are the aspects that compose the primary mind. So they're the same nature in the sense one cannot exist without the other. So the primary mind and its surrounding mental factors, they have these 5 concomitant aspects, as I wrote here. The primary mind and its surrounding mental factors have different aspects, but they are of the same entity, or rather the same nature. What determines that they are of the same entity are these 5 concomitant aspects. And here we can understand where one primary mind begins and another one, and where it ends and where a new one begins. The first one is that it's the same basis. The mental factors base themselves on the same sense power that the primary mind bases itself on. For example, if I have a visual awareness, the mental factors are also based on that visual awareness. I can't have a primary mind based on eye awareness and the mental factors are based on another sensory object. They have the same basis, and there are 6 of them. The 5 senses, as we said, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and touch, and then our the mind, the mental awareness, or sense power of the mind, the Wangshe. And as I said before, we can have a maximum of 6 at the same time. What shows more clearly when one begins and one ends is this second point, is Mikpa Tsongkhapa, the same object of perception. The mental factors in the primary mind apprehend the same object of perception. For example, the valid visual direct cognition that perceives the form of a vase, and the mental factors which surround it have the form of the vase as the object of perception. So the mind, let's remember that the definition of mind, Selshing Rigpa, clear and cognitive, clear because it's always active and it's also self-aware, knowing, and knowing, cognitive means it always has an object of perception, and we have 6 objects of perception that exist. Mostly, the 6 objects are form, sound, taste, touch, smell, and mental images. The more or generalized images, I prefer to say mental images. If I'm seeing this apple, for example, I have this direct visual awareness that doesn't perceive that apple, but a form, because it's not made just of not just made of form, but also of taste, apple, and also touch. So what happens is, when I see the apple, I'm not seeing the apple, I'm seeing the form of the apple. So the eye awareness doesn't perceive the apple, it perceives the form of the apple. At a certain point, I'm not looking at the apple anymore. Let's say I look at the cup. At that point, what's my object of perception, my visual perception, is the form of the cup. And at that point, the first perception ended, and then because the object has changed, we have a new mind, a new visual awareness, a new form of the cup. How I can feel something, smell something, taste something. I can hear the sound of something, And I also have a mental perception of it at the same time, a little bit like when we're watching a movie. I can say, oh, you know, what a beautiful image, what horrible soundtrack. Because the next concomitant aspect is the same aspect. The mental factors in the primary mind have the same mode of perception. So if it's pleasurable for the primary mind, it's pleasurable for the mental factors, but it's possible to have a visual awareness that's pleasurable, but an auditive one that is not pleasurable, and then another sensory awareness that's neutral. So what's a sign that shows us that one thought has changed, that the object has changed, and the feeling has changed? Because every thought has a different type of feeling. We'll see them further along. It can be pleasurable, non-pleasurable, or neutral. So if I come into contact with something that is pleasurable, and then I have a feeling that is suffering, that's a new perception. It's connected to the previous one, but it's a new perception. It's a new mind.
Vediamo dopo queste cose, perché cerchiamo adesso di concentrarci su questi punti.
So let's just try to concentrate on these points now and to not get lost. These are things that are not so immediate, and then to get to the point that Daphne brought up, we have to, he suggests that she take note of her question, and we'll look at it further along. So a thought needs to have the same sensory base, the same object, have the same aspect. For example, so if the object appears as a vase to the primary mind, it will also appear to the surrounding mental factors. So it's not just about the feeling if it's pleasurable or not. It's about what it is. What is that object? And they have the same time. The mental factors in the primary mind, they occur simultaneously, or rather the primary mind and the surrounding mental factors arise, remain, and come to an end simultaneously. So when the primary mind arises, its mental factors come together, and when it ceases, they cease together. It's not that first there's a mental factor and then another one comes and another, and then the other one comes, and then the primary mind comes after. No, it's all simultaneously, and then we'll see this more in detail later. So a memory, a memory is, it's a mental object, a memory. Then we have the same substance. And when we talk about bodhicitta, that this is going to become very important. The mental factors in the primary mind are of one sole substance. For example, the primary mind cannot be both an eye and an ear awareness. There cannot be more than one mental factor of the same type. For example, there cannot be two feelings or sensations or two discerning mental factors around the primary mind. Or rather, when we say they're of the same substance, a mind, primary mind, has different characteristics, but it cannot have two of the same characteristics of that primary mind. So, for example, if there's a feeling of pleasure, there can also be the feeling of suffering in that same primary mind. If there's a discernment of a certain kind, there can't be a different kind of discernment in that same primary mind. And when we look at the mental factors, you'll be able to understand this better. But what's important that a primary mind has certain characteristics, and those characteristics is one per type that cannot change. The primary mind needs to change for those characteristics to change. Are you following? So a fundamental point of what we've just seen is that our thoughts are based on sensory objects and on sense powers. I'm not able to perceive anything independently from the sense powers, from my body. I have 5 sense powers, and I have the sense power of my mind. According to how my inner chemistry is, I mean, this will have power over my sense powers. Remember, these sense powers are something physical. Yesterday we talked about the gross mind goes together with our gross body. So the sense power of the mind, where is that in our body? Is it our brain? Also, in my opinion, and here we can debate about this, the mental awareness, the sense power of the mind is not just the mind, but is also in our heart, it's in our lungs, it's in our liver, in our gut, many different parts of our body that in the modern medicine, where we ask, where is the mind? Where is the mind? Is it in the brain, or is it in different parts of our body? What I think is that our mental sense power has many characteristics, and many are connected to our inner chemistry, our various organs. It's very, very complex. It's not just the neurons. There are many other aspects that are important, and this is not what we're discussing now, but we're talking about our perception of reality, because we relate with everything through our thoughts. And in the end, what is the mind, if we go look at it? It's this tool through which we experience reality, that we create, that we live, that we experience everything. So, and consequently, it's the tool through which we exist. But our mind doesn't exist in a separate, autonomous, independent way, independent from our body. We've just seen that. Because thoughts depend on the sense powers, and also on the sense objects. So every thought is a union of 3 things: sense object, sense power, and sense consciousness. And this is one of the mental factors called contact, which we'll see tomorrow or maybe the day after tomorrow. But what we call reality is the union of these 3 things. At least for me, the first time I was able to understand this a little bit, it just opened up a whole world and scared me a little bit in a certain way. That what I see, for me, what exists, every thought that I have, every emotion that I feel, every perception that I have, is not what is, but is this union. And my mind doesn't exist without my body. On a subtle level, and even on a very subtle level, the very subtle mind is upheld by the very subtle body that goes from life to life. But once every thought is based on a sense power, it means that the mind cannot exist without these sense powers. This means a lot. So what happens in the mind happens in the body, and what happens in the body happens in the mind. Because it's the example I've given quite a few times. If I take these two objects, I take this apple, and I take the damaro, for example, and I ask you what color they are. It's not a difficult question. What color? The apple is red, and the damaro, you can see that it's green. Are they very different colors? I mean, they're very easy to distinguish between them. Why are they different colors? Why is this red, and why is that green, and why are they so different? Because they are. What's the reason? Because the light touches these objects. The reflection and then the light comes back to us with a certain frequency, and our visual awareness as human beings perceive the light frequencies in a certain way. Certain light frequencies for our eyes we are not able to see. Our sense power, our eye sense power for certain frequencies are not able to see. For example, instead the eyes of a dog is said, I say is said because it's an assumption, because I haven't seen through the eyes of a dog, but what I've been told is that a dog's, when these same frequencies come to the eyes of a dog, green and red seem like they're two shades of gray, very similar between them. But are these two shades of gray, or is this red and this green? It depends on the eye sense power. So what we see, what we think we see, this reality that we think we see, we don't see anything we don't see anything beyond that what's not connected to our sense powers, what we touch, what we smell, what we see. I've heard of raptic touch, for example. From what I've understood, it was studied for blind people. They have this ability to know when an object is in front of them without knowing that place, or obviously without seeing it, without first getting there and touching it. And it's called this raptic touch, where they have this perception of something that is in front of them, even though they're not able to see it. They can feel the presence. Our touch has many, the sense power of touch has many, many different levels of because our perception depend on our sense powers, but not only, depend also on our sense of awarenesses. So a very important point in all of this for me is the awareness that we live and we perceive. Every thought comes to us through the sense powers, and these sense powers need to be taken care of if we want to have a certain type of perception. And among all of our sense powers, the most important is the sense power of our mind. It's Tsotsem is translated as primary mind, but Tso means main. So it's a primary mind understood as main mind, so, or the principal mind. So it's the principal mind, and then the various aspects that make it up. Like if we say spaghetti with the tomato sauce, so that's the dish, and then we have the various ingredients. So the main mind, it's not very correct because it seems that the other aspects are of secondary importance, but in reality, you know, and you can find your own words. What's important is to understand the concept. It's not easy to find the right translation. So every thought, every perception has then many characteristics. So and we'll see these different characteristics, but it's based on a sense power, and it's interesting. If we take the Heart Sutra, for example, the Heart Sutra often talks about the 18 realms of existence. The universe is divided into 18 realms of existence. Can anyone tell me what they are? It's if you divide 18 by 6, it's 3. So now we make it a little easier. What are the 6? 6 by 3 is 18. And the 6 are, the 18 realms are the 6 sensory, the 6 sense powers, the 6 awarenesses. So let's start from outside. The 6 objects, sense objects of form, smell, etc., and then mental images. And then we have our eye sense power, our ear sense power, our nose sense power, our tongue sense power, and then our body the sense power of touch, and then our mental sense power of the mind. And then we have the 6 consciousness, the visual awareness, the auditory awareness, the smell awareness, and then and the taste awareness, and then the touch, tactile awarenesses. So all phenomena are divided into these 18 parts. So here we have an aspect of terminology. When we talk about consciousness, we're talking about manifest mind, the mind that it's not consciousness like mindfulness, being aware. No, we're talking about the consciousness is on a gross level. It's the manifest mind. When we talk about we can use another synonym like cognition or perception. I've never found a word that really convinces me, but maybe I make even more confusion using different words, but I prefer to use different terms, and since I'm not so convinced of just one. The question is about dreams. Where are dreams in all this? Because we can see dreams, we can taste in our dream, etc. The object of perception in a dream is not form, is not taste, is not touch, but is the mental image of the form, of taste, etc. So in the dream, the object of perception is a mental object. So It's as if now I remember someone. I remember a smell. I remember a taste. My object of perception is not the taste itself. It's the memory of the taste. It's the mental image of the taste. So it's a mental image. So in a dream, the object of perception are mental objects. It's this the and the sense power is also mental, and the sense consciousness is also a mental. This is something, if we look in different sutras of Buddha, we would find these 18 realms. This is just, maybe you've heard about the 18 emptinesses, or you've heard about the 18 emptinesses. But in reality, emptiness is one. It's the lack of inherent existence. So what would be the 18 emptinesses? Of the emptiness of form, sound, of smell, of it's the empty. It's refers to the 18 realms. The emptiness of the 18 realms. I let you reflect and look into this. It's not so obvious that our entire existence can be classified in these 18 realms. I let you think, reflect on this. When we talk about emptiness, we talk about the form doesn't exist as form in an intrinsic, autonomous way. They appear as if they do, but in reality they're not. But the point now is try now to observe, reflect on this fact. The entire universe, our entire existence, can be summarized in these 18 realms, the 6 sense objects, the sense powers, and the 6 sense consciousnesses. But I mean, form doesn't exist as form without the sense power of the sense power of the visual awareness, for example. I mean, there's so much to think about here, to reflect upon. So tomorrow we're going to start with the actual mental, with the mental factors. But today I wanted to, and it's not a detailed explanation that we've given. This is the first approach where we start to observe the different types of mind and start to look at this relationship between perception, mind, object of perception, and sense power. These three that are always together. I'm just going to close the parentheses that I opened before. We need to take care of our sense powers. If I want to see clearly, I need to take care of my eyes. If I want to think clearly, I need to take care of my sense power of my mind. So when I said before that the mental sense power is not just in the brain, but for example, if I eat very heavy food, does it influence my mental state of being? Yes. My state, actually, there was a very interesting study that was conducted. They took lab rats that are genetically identical, and they realized that over time, some were calmer and some were more nervous, and they divided them up into calm and nervous mice. And then they took the microbiome in the gut, so they put they took from the calm mice and put them into the nervous mice, and vice versa. So the nervous ones became calm and the calm ones became nervous. They were showing that the microorganisms within influence our emotional and state and our mood. Or rather, just to give the answer. Sorry, I didn't hear the question. It's not one or the other, it's both together. It's like when we're together, we're interacting. You transform through the interaction with me, I transform through the interaction with you. So these microorganisms within us they transform. They're influenced by us and we're influenced by them. It's reciprocal. What's important is understanding that the mind is not an entity that exists separate from the body. And we see that our mind is based on these sense powers. We see how important our body is. That's why a healthy lifestyle is important. Sleeping well, eating well, being in a healthy environment. These are really important aspects. And one reaches a certain balance and stability, inner stability. One is less influenced by other context aspects. I just wanted to underline this aspect because normally when we study the mind, we have this tendency of seeing the mind as if it were separate from the body, and vice versa, when instead they are vitally linked. So I think we can conclude here. I invite you to ask questions, to not take things for granted, to try to reflect. Write down your questions and bring your questions. It's important to have questions that are more elaborated. Of course, at the moment doubts come, but normally when we study this, it's not a moment where one just receives and that's enough. We need to reflect. We need to get to our own conclusion about things. And that's the difference. When we're learning something, when we start to learn something, that first level, we learn it on this basis of assumption. When someone explains us something and say, oh, okay, there's the direct and the indirect and the inferential mind. This is all assumption. And then gradually we ask ourselves, how is it? And we analyze it, we reflect on it, we study it, we talk about it until we get ideally to an inferential valid cognition where it's a certainty that we have reached. And the ideal next step would be realizing that. So it's no longer inferential, but it is a direct experience. And that's what we mean when we use the word realize something. It's a direct experience. Let's take one of the most important points, like unconditional love or the correct view of reality. That process of development of that state of consciousness is divided into 3 phases called the wisdom of listening, the wisdom of understanding, and the wisdom of meditation. The wisdom of listening is when we develop, listening is when receiving information And when we're talking about, for example, love, unconditional love, I finished that first phase once I've been able to understand it, and so one has a correct assumption about it. Once one has received the information, then so that's the first one is the wisdom of listening, and the wisdom of understanding. It comes about through analysis, reflection, debate, etc. And then one, by doing that, it's no longer information that one received, but it's one's own certainty that based on logic, then it becomes an inferential cognition. And once one has realized that, at that point, through this knowledge, one tries to induce within oneself that mental state initially that's not direct, because it's through a concept. Like, I don't feel unconditional love yet, but I try to induce that feeling, that side. I have an idea, a general idea of what unconditional love. Once I'm able to induce that state, and I'm able to stay in single pointed, when I'm able to stay single pointedly in with that state in meditation, until it's no longer a concept, but an actual feeling, an actual spontaneous mind, then one has realized the last one. So when we realize impermanence, it's having a valid
familiarizzarsi con il concetto finché a un certo punto diventi un'esperienza diretta e non più concettuale.
So then it becomes a valid, direct experience. Okay. I wanted to say all this to show you that these three types of minds are fundamental to understand the whole path and the tools that are given along the path. So it's from assumption to inferential cognition to direct valid cognition. So I invite you to read this booklet. Look, you can look at the examples from page 52 onwards. Actually, from page 51 onwards, you can see there was the definitions, etc. So you can study more. As I said before, it's an opportunity for us to start observing and knowing our own minds. And for me, the most beautiful thing, I don't know if it's the most beautiful, but one of the beautiful things is when I started to see this, and every time I go back to, every time I see it, I go back to this feeling. It helps me, how can I say, just shows us how subjective reality is. It helps us perceive the subjectivity of reality. Because if what I see is the union of the sense object, sense power, and sense consciousness, what I see and what you see, do we see the same thing? No. In reality, no. And already that, if we really, really think about it, it's overwhelming. There is a common reality without analysis, and that's why it's extremely important to see what we mean by non-valid cognition. One last example, and then we can close. if I go out in the dark and I go towards the center, and on the ground there's an object that appears to me as being a snake, and I strongly believe that it's a snake. That form comes to my eyes and I perceive it as being a snake. I get scared and I start running. In my subjective reality, in my personal experience, is that a snake or not? No, it's not a snake. Why? Because if it were a snake, it should be able to bite me, to strike. I ran away because I was afraid. But even if I was afraid, that object didn't have the ability to sustain the characteristics that I attributed to it. So I lived as if it were a snake, but it wasn't a snake. I mean, maybe I'm never going to understand, but the fact that I see it as a snake and it even scares me and I run away, it doesn't mean that it's actually a snake. So there are wrong awarenesses. There are wrong perceptions. We're full of wrong awarenesses. This is important because otherwise we can fall into nihilism and think that everything it exists in the mind, and you just need to believe that it's real, and this is not true. Otherwise Santa Claus would exist, and maybe he does exist and I just don't know. But the fundamental point is this one. To see that a wrong awareness is a wrong awareness is already a big step. When one has a direct experience opposite, or an inferential cognition that is opposite, I mean, that's the only way to defeat a wrong awareness. And one way is to analyze, does that object actually have the ability to sustain the characteristics and the functions? Often we just take that for granted. A beautiful exercise would be like 2 people or more people together, minimum 2 people, for example. They're in front of the same object with 2 different points of view or various points of view, and you say, who's right, who's wrong? The first question to do together, to ask together, let's analyze my view, let's analyze your point of view. Can that object sustain the characteristics and functions that you have attributed to it? Is it possible? Yes. Okay, then you are right. The value that I attribute to that object, is that object able to sustain, to uphold also those characteristics and functions? Yes. So we are both correct. We're both right. And then whether one point of view is more beneficial or not, that's another topic. But we both have valid awarenesses, valid cognitions. Or maybe you do that exercise and there are 2 wrong awarenesses, and that's also possible. So that I invite you to do that exercise. Sometimes by doing that exercise, you get to the result of a third solution. For me personally, I found it just surprised me. It was marvelous, how there's this relationship between past experiences, projections for the future, sense objects that appear to us in this present moment, and we perceive it all without being aware of this process. So the more we're able to analyze this process, the more we can be aware of what happens and redirect ourselves.
Non è che più andiamo avanti, più avremo certezza. Okay? Dipende come andiamo avanti. Magari più andiamo avanti, più dubbi accumuliamo e meno certezze abbiamo su certe cose, più certezze abbiamo su altre. Dipende dal modo in cui noi andiamo avanti.
The objective is the further we go, then we should have fewer doubts and more certainty. But it's not just a question of time. Sorry, I missed the question. So.
Okay. No. La consapevolezza,
awareness, the function of awareness is not to have certainty of things. So that's not the point. The point is, let's say something. We have certainty of many things, and then we're going to die, and that gross mind ends, ceases. That conceptual mind ceases. Our objective is to have awareness, to know how to direct our actions, our emotions, and create this, transform our mind on a very subtle level for what is going to continue for life to life. This is our objective, because we can accumulate a tremendous amount of knowledge, but then sooner or later we're going to die, and that stays in our gross mind, and we can't take that with us. Instead, the experiences that we've lived and repeated, that little by little shape our being on a deeper level, the actions that we do, we bring the force of that action with us, the strength of our action with us, the so-called karma, and our deep habits, we bring them with us. This is our main objective among all of this. I'd say it's time for dedications, so we can conclude here. And tomorrow we'll start with the 51 mental factors, starting with the first 5 that are most important. We'll dedicate more time to them, and then going forward they get easier and it's faster.
Münsela tatu ne gyurchi jetsun lame kotse raptenchi namkra tinle chochur gepadam losan tempe drume sasumki drove münsela tatu ne gyurchi kewa kuntu yanda lamada drame chöki pela longchöchi Sada lamge yönde Dorje change kopa nyurtobe sho Nimo dele tsendele Nime kuyan dele kshin Kuncho sumke ngodrubu tsol Kuncho sumke
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the 3 jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the 3 jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Thank you, everyone. Tomorrow teachings will be at 11 a.m. In the afternoon. There will be Lama Caroline, who should have arrived today. I haven't seen her, but I hope she's arrived. And she will give teachings on Avalokiteshvara Semninalso. Self-healing is at 9 a.m. with Francesco, and then 7:30 there are the monks who do puja. At 9 there's self-healing, and then 11 there'll be teachings, and then tomorrow's Francesco, but then I should be coming at 9. And there's also Trukur Yoga at 7:30 as well for those who'd like.